20146 is your SMS line at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. Get involved. This is your sector trends this morning. All right, now the BBI report was officially launched at the Bomas of Kenya on November 27th, 2019. But the task force explained it to the more than 4,700 delegates from all the 47 counties who attended the event. Well, later on, we saw the event marked by culmination of months of consultations between the task force and Kenyans. Now, fast forward 2021, there should be a discussion on the way forward. While that awaits, let's look at how it's going to affect small businesses in the country. Now, in the document, it cites that, and I quote, that, well, if you look at that statement, it says that the Constitution recognizes the need for an economic system that provides equitable opportunities for all the people of Kenya to benefit from economic growth in comprehensive, fair, and sustainable manner. Well, let's make sense of that as relates to smaller businesses in Kenya. Now, to aid this discussion this morning, we're joined by Joram Winamo, who is the CEO Sandbox, and an institution that works with the entrepreneurs, and Collins Aloch, who is a lawyer and vast economic analyst here at Business. Gentlemen, happy to have you around.
Thank you for inviting us.
All right, Joram, let me start with you, therefore, as somebody who is actually in direct contact with the smaller businesses. Now, a lot of commentaries have been made on the proposed political structure from the BBI report. Let's start with that bill and break it down for a better understanding. But just before we get there, therefore, talk to me. Do you feel that this report has touched on the key aspects that have been affecting smaller businesses in this country?
Okay, thank you for that question. It's very interesting because the whole BBI conversation has been an evolving conversation. So when it initially came out, there was proposals like, tax amnesty for 7 years for startups and the like. But what we now have in the final document is a very general statement about economic prosperity. And then in section 11A, part D, it talks about an economic system that supports small and micro enterprises. And if you continue to read the document in the first schedule, which is like an appendix in terms of how this will be implemented, it says that Parliament will be given 1 year to enact legislation that brings this section that you just read, into life. So, if I was a small business, what I would feel is that this whole BBI process is just simply making a promise, but has not clearly told me what that promise is. It's very general. It talks about very idealistic things in terms of how small businesses will be supported. Because if you go later into the document, you find very specific prescriptions about the structure, political structures. So it means that they could have prescribed in a very detailed manner how this economic prosperity will be achieved. But what has happened is that it's been left, for Parliament to determine what that is eventually going to look like within the first year after it is passed.
All right, Mr. Minamo, I'm going to come to you because there are actually other areas that they want to alight on a general perspective. I'm going to ask you the question, whether maybe this is why SMEs need to plug themselves on when we're looking at that document. Let me bring in Collins as well. Collins, I mean, when you look at that document, especially when it touches on smaller businesses, and I would like to think the smaller businesses are the ones that are actually owned by the youth in this country. Do you feel like there's a clear strategy and plan in the way in which we're going to support SMEs in the economy?
Thank you, Simba. Article 201 it talks about prudent management of public expenditure. And if you want to look at BBI document, you want to ask yourself whether the proposals in the BBI document are geared towards prudent expenditure and prudent use of public finances. BBI is a political and an economical process, but we've relied more on the political angle of BBI. without looking at the economical ramifications that BBI is proposing. I like it that with time, the BBI team decided to drop that 7 years tax holiday that was granted to SMEs, because in my view, it was not realistic at all.
Yes.
Because check for instance, and this has happened before, where we used to have tax holidays of 10 years when it was offered to EPZs. Remember, what happened is that companies would come for 10 years, establish themselves, enjoy that benefit of a tax holiday, and then wound up, go, come up with a new outfit, do the same for 10 years. Now, the assumption was that this is targeted towards the youth, but this is breeding an unfair competition, an unfair ground for everyone. And I think it was going to be susceptible to be challenged in court on the basis of discrimination.
Yes.
Look at it this way. Me and you are in the market doing the same thing. We are both selling books or selling whatever. But since I am younger than you, 2 years younger than you, then I'm allowed to have a 7-year tax holiday. But you, who is older than me 2 years, just because of the benefit of being older than me, you're not allowed for that. For instance, look at what happened during KEMSA corruption. 60% of the companies that were involved in KEMSA heist were new companies, were MSMEs.
Yes.
If we are going to go by that, those companies are going to have been benefited from tax holidays of 7 years. You're telling someone you have robbed the government, but now the government is being so magnanimous and asking you, take 7 years tax break. You're not going to pay us taxes. I think beyond just having statements that are political expedient, government ought to have looked at the ramifications of those statements. Bring in KRA, ask KRA, how much are we going to lose? Should we impose something like a tax holiday in SMEs? But now looking at it holistically, I think what the government now is, what the BBI steering committee is now looking at is breeding an environment that is supporting a growth of MSMEs. What do MSMEs need? Access to credit. Now we have a lot of MSMEs who are surviving on loans.
Yes.
But then the other assumption is that all young people who are running small businesses have them registered, of which they don't. They just operate them in their own atmosphere, which are not registered. So I think BBI ought to have embraced that reality. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think they have.
Yes. All right. Let me bring in Joram as well, so we can actually start looking at the different aspects under that document that can link to actually smaller businesses in the country. Now, Joram, let's talk about this 50-year economic plan now. It's 50 years. I mean, how will that plan or that proposal assist with strategic plans that are actually going to touch directly on SMEs?
I think the broader issue is, do we trust this government? Because
yes.
We've had Vision 2030.
Yes.
And there were several things that were to have been implemented, and what we've seen is perennial delays as far as that is concerned. So when you tell an SME 50 years, we are really concerned about today and tomorrow. We don't think that far out. One, because also the economic environment is not very favorable towards long-term thinking and long-term planning. So a lot of people are actually just based, thinking about their survival today.
Yes.
And also when you're not very detailed in terms of how you're prescribing that, 50-year plan, then again, as I said, it remains a document of promises towards small and medium-sized enterprises. And generally, as far as the economy is concerned, it's made a lot of promises. But then when it comes to political structures, you see very specific recommendations or very specific deals of how to operationalize it. So if an SME was actually to read this and understand it, what they end up feeling from the entire document is that this is something that's geared towards, building political structures, but not very keen around the economy. And even when you look at other economic policies that have been, operationalized in the past, things like AGPO, access to, opportunities for the youth and women. Some of these things have not been implemented to their full, implementation. So you find that even the people who should have been benefiting from it do not benefit from it. So there's probably a huge element of mistrust that comes in because one, when you look at the track record, you don't see people putting their money where their mouth is when they make this kind of promises.
Yes.
Maybe as a sweetener to, get people interested. So what I've seen is that even a lot of SMEs do not know what this document actually entails. So they are largely staying away from the process because, you know, it's not really speaking to, to their needs. One of the things Collins mentioned is that, you know, we have a challenge as far as the government borrowing from banks locally. That's one of the most harmful things that happens towards SMEs, because the same government that is saying it will create a favorable environment for you is competing with you when it comes to access to credit. And that's where you would really have proven that if I want to support SMEs, let me stop borrowing from banks so that you can have access to that money. They need that a lot more than the promises that is in the document right now.
Yes, Jerome, just before I let you go on that as well and bring in Collins to sort of also talk about counties on exactly how they've been encouraged to form regional blocks that can sort of integrate SMEs in their business. Fine, we're going to come to that. But do you feel that even around this 50-year economic plan, that document should have given us specific steps, tangible things that we can actually look at for any SME to say, well, I'm going to plug myself here. This is good. This is debatable. This is not debatable. Is it a general sort of clause in that document to sort of fill pages? Is that what you're saying?
It's too general. It could have been a lot more prescriptive.
Yes.
We have institutions in this country that are specifically built for SMEs. Kenya Industrial Estate, Kirby. You know, there's so many institutions. There's supposed to be an operationalization of Biashara Bank, which is an amalgamation of Youth Fund and Uwezo Fund. So there are all these things that could have been embedded in law in terms of how these institutions are being set up to support that bit.
Yes.
As we speak, there are two bills that were being passed in Senate and Parliament, the Prompt Payments Bill and the Startup Bill. So we already have a lot of initiatives that could have been put together and consolidated and embedded in this so that people are able to see. When you say there's a 50-year economic plan, then there are very clear steps of how we can get there. Because we are not short of economic thinking in this country. We have brilliant minds, we have brilliant plans. That could have been something a lot more specific that would have gotten SMEs sitting up and saying, we can see very specific recommendations, the same way we see specific recommendations around political structures. We can see institutions, we can see plans, and that would have made them engage with this process a lot more.
Pretty much. Jerome, I'm going to come back to you on exactly what the other side of the coin could be. Somebody is going to argue, well, at least you have a framework on which you can actually start charting a way forward. I'm going to come back to you on that. But Collins, let's talk about the counties as well. Now, under that, they're saying that counties are being encouraged to create regional economic blocks other than just competing among themselves. How are SMEs going to peg themselves on this, Collins? Because we do know the on-source revenue is something that has eluded counties from time to time. In fact, the biggest source of revenue for counties is the national government. And in that BBI document, you've seen they're saying, well, increase it from what it is now to 35%. Is it something that we can look forward to?
One, that proposal of increasing the revenue allocation from 15% to 35% is as good as lazy, because it is not practical at all. I mean, I think, you know, the sad, unfortunate occurrence with this country is that you place figures without having any tangible evidence as to why you're placing figures. I think you're just throwing numbers, and it's like a bait. You're telling county governors that we are going to increase your revenue to 35%, and then now they're happy. But when you come to sit to look at its pragmatism, or rather to look at its reality, it dawns on you. I think yesterday the government has reduced the money sent to counties to 326.5 billion as from what they had proposed. Look at it this way. Let us go to the numbers. 35% revenue allocation to the county governments. This is a county that creates revenue for around 1.6 trillion.
Yes.
Our debt repayment is around $1 trillion per year. So you're telling me, if we go by that line of 35%, that could be something close to 600 billion. If 1 trillion is paid towards debt repayment to facilitate our debt repayment plans, then it means only 600 billion that we are remaining with will go to the counties.
Yes.
What is remaining at the national government? Totally nothing. To tell you, this is as good as dead on arrival. It's not going to be practiced anywhere. If the and nothing absolutely stops the government even right now from enhancing that 15%. 15% is just a baseline that the constitution is saying at no certain point should the government go beyond 15%, below 15%. But now you're telling Kenyans that for us to have 35%, you have to include it to the in the constitution when you are actually struggling with sending 15%. I think we have sacrificed reason at the expense of political expedient proposals. Talking about now the regional blocks that are being proposed for SMEs.
Yes.
I mean, this is equally another 8. And even just looking at that 50-year plan that the government is giving, the government has, the BBI has failed to be specific on aspects that are targeting the economy, but they have been so specific on aspect targeting political growth, because you look at their proposal about executive expansion, and they are so direct. They even have a roadmap on how they want to achieve that. They have a roadmap on how they want to attain that. In as much as it even beats logic to have offices that are in a presidential system. For instance, a leader of government, it's not in a presidential system, but they are so specific on such things. But when it comes to matters aimed at the youth, talk about help loans that are being given, talk about this proposal on 7-year tax plan. I mean, 50-year plan is so huge that you cannot pinpoint its practicability.
Yes.
I mean, you're giving such a wide time for people to come and assess how it's going. Talk about the regional blocks that they're proposing. I mean, how empowered are the regions at their own levels to even come together at the first instance? Look at Lake region, Lake Alreb, that has been constituted by counties coming from the Lake region, and even the one in Pwani. What has happened for 5 years that those blocks have been in existence? Nothing towards aiding nothing towards aiding the SMEs. They have not even opened their markets. They have not sat down to regularize their markets at those places. What is ailing SMEs is over-regularization. A lot of licenses that we have to keep getting licenses and approvals. I don't know from what and what and what. What BBI should have done at the first instance, and you don't even have to have a process of constitutional amendment for you to have such proposals. I mean, it's as good as a presidential declaration or a ministerial gazette notice. Remove certain bottlenecks that are hindering the growth of SMEs. I mean, leverage the market and leverage the platform for everyone, so that we're saying it's not only geared toward the big boys who are coming in under the guise of being SMEs.
Yes. All right, Jerome, let me bring you in on that as well. Let's move over to the other area that BBI document is really trying to address. They're saying, well, we have to protect homegrown inventions and chart a way for properly commercializing them. Jerome, you are always in touch with these smaller businesses. You know exactly where we are in terms of our inventions in the country, and you know exactly what is missing in between there. Do we need a BBI document for us to even address these basic areas of protecting homegrown inventions and actually talking about commercializing them? Did we need BBI to address that? And if indeed we needed them to address that, then Jerome, how and what is lacking?
Yeah, so that particular provision, I don't understand why it's there, because we are already part of international intellectual property protocols that make it very clear how these kinds of things can be protected locally, internationally. I've gone through some of those processes myself in terms of copywriting, trademarking, concepts and things that are protected by law. And so I am not sure what problem it's addressing when it's put that way within the document. I don't know what the person who drafted it, was trying to address, because we already have very robust frameworks. What we need in the market is more education around how people can do that. And I did mention these institutions that are in place to assist with that. Like when it comes to manufacturing, Kirdi is one of the institutions that can do a very robust job in educating manufacturers on how they can go about, whether it's patenting or trademarking or protecting their intellectual property. The institutions already exist. So if they were telling us that there's additional value, they should have gone ahead to prescribe exactly what it is that is being addressed in the market? Is it setting aside a capacity building fund? Is it setting aside a provision where, people will be taken through a process where this is either subsidized or training happens? Like it's just too vague for us to be sure what problem is being addressed. So again, as I said, it is too general a statement. What it makes me wonder is who was being consulted when all this was being done.
Yes.
But I am not sure that there was a forum that actually had SMEs in the room to give feedback on these kinds of issues so that it's very clear what problems are being addressed. As Colin said, if you had very clear, even if you had a general statement around reducing licensing and that kind of thing, then you have a need that's being addressed that's very clear and touches the hearts of every SME, in the country. Then you have people sitting up and saying, okay, this is something that I want to listen a bit more. How are you going to do this? How are we going to engage this?
Yes.
And then if we had an entire section that was prescribing how they were going to go and do that, then you have, something very clear, and people can say, okay, we can debate the merits and demerits of this kind of proposal, rather than waiting another year to see what MPs are going to come up with. And it's probably going to be an entirely new crop of MPs who will be doing this, because as soon as BBI is passed, we get into electioneering, and people will not have their attention on making these things work. They'll be looking to get back into office.
Yes. Jerome, we take a short break here on Business AM, but once we come back, Jerome, we're going to clear the conversation where I'll be asking you this question. It is 2021. You do know exactly how the economy was in 2020. So like to think that BBI could come at a better time for the economy. Good, if that's what they are saying. So the question for you is going to be, what seems to be the biggest challenge for smaller businesses as we start 2021? And Collins, your question is going to be, wow, we might be saying it's vague and general, but doesn't it give us a starting point? What do you feel? Once we come back on Business AM, get involved, 20146 at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms.